Death row, the longest wait for justice in America. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today, we're diving into something that's going to make your blood run cold. We're talking about America's death row system, where justice moves so slowly that some inmates have been waiting over 40 years for their fate to be decided. 40 years. Think about that. But this isn't just about statistics and legal delays. This is about one case that exposes the terrifying cracks in our justice system. A case where the truth was buried, where innocent details were ignored, and where time became the cruelest punishment of all. If you're ready to go down this rabbit hole with me, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, and let's get into this nightmare together. December 3, 1984. San Quentin State Prison, California. The fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects as Corrections Officer Michael Torres walked the narrow corridor of East Block, death row's oldest wing. He had been doing this walk for 7 years, but tonight something felt different. The air was thick, oppressive, carrying whispers from cells that housed America's most dangerous criminals. Cell 47 stood at the end, home to Raymond Cole, a man who had been waiting for his execution date for nearly 15 years. Torres stopped outside the cell. Cole sat on his bunk, perfectly still, staring at the concrete wall. His hands were clasped together, knuckles white. "Cole," Torres called out. "You have a visitor." Cole didn't move. His lips were moving, almost imperceptibly, as if he were counting something only he could see. "Cole," Torres repeated, louder this time. The inmate's head turned slowly, mechanically. His eyes were hollow, emptied of whatever humanity had once lived there. "Tell them I've been waiting," Cole whispered. "Tell them I know what they did." Before Torres could respond, an alarm screamed through the corridor. 3 cells down, another inmate was seizing, foam spilling from his mouth. In the chaos that followed, Torres forgot about Cole's cryptic words. He wouldn't remember them again until it was too late. Across the country, in a cramped Boston apartment, investigative journalist Sarah Chen was drowning in case files. She had spent the last 8 months researching America's death row system for her documentary series. The numbers were staggering. Over 3,000 inmates waiting for execution. Some had been there for decades, their appeals grinding through an impossibly slow legal system. But one case kept pulling her back. Raymond Cole. Convicted in 1982 for the brutal murders of 3 people in Oakland. The evidence seemed overwhelming at the time. Fingerprints at the scene, witness testimony, a confession. But Sarah had found something the jury never saw. Hidden in the archived police reports was a detective's note, written 3 days after Cole's arrest. Detective Frank Morrison had documented an interview with a witness who claimed to have seen 2 men leaving the crime scene, not one. The witness description didn't match Cole. Morrison's note ended with a single line, "Requires follow-up investigation." That investigation never happened. Morrison retired 6 months later and moved to Arizona. The witness, a homeless veteran named Thomas Wheeler, died of exposure in 1983. His testimony died with him. Sarah stared at the faded photocopy of Morrison's note. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She had tracked down Morrison's current address 3 weeks ago but hadn't worked up the courage to call. Something about this case felt dangerous, like pulling a thread that might unravel something much bigger than one wrongful conviction. She dialed the number. It rang 4 times before an automated message cut in. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." Back at San Quentin, Raymond Cole finally had his visitor. Attorney David Brennan sat across from him in the visitation room, separated by thick plexiglass. Brennan looked exhausted. He had been Cole's lawyer for 12 years, filing appeal after appeal, each one denied. "Raymond, I need to tell you something," Brennan began, his voice cracking. "The governor denied your clemency petition. Your execution date has been set. March 15, 1985. Cole's expression didn't change. "Did you find him?" he asked quietly. Brennan shifted uncomfortably. "Find who?" Cole leaned forward, his face suddenly intense. "The man who was with me that night. The man who actually pulled the trigger. The man the police let walk away." Brennan had heard this story 100 times. Every death row inmate claimed innocence. But something in Cole's eyes made him hesitate. "Raymond, we've been through this. There's no evidence of another person. Cole's jaw tightened. Then look at Detective Morrison's original notes. The witness, Thomas Wheeler. He saw him. He saw both of us. But they buried it because it didn't fit their story. 3,000 miles away, Sarah Chen was booking a flight to Arizona. She had to find Morrison. She had to know why that investigation was never completed. As she packed her bag, her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was anonymous. The subject line read, "Stop looking into the Cole case." The message contained a single sentence. Thomas Wheeler wasn't the only witness they silenced. Sarah's heart pounded. She stared at her screen, her finger hovering over the delete button. Then she saw the attachment. A photograph. Grainy old but unmistakable. It showed Detective Morrison standing outside the Oakland crime scene in 1982. Next to him was another man in plain clothes, their heads bent together in conversation. Sarah zoomed in on the second man's face. She recognized him immediately from her research. He wasn't a detective. He was a prosecutor. The same prosecutor who had built the case against Raymond Cole. The same prosecutor who was now a federal judge. But when Sarah looked closer at the background of the photo, behind the two men, partially obscured by crime scene tape, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. A figure standing in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. And in his hand, barely visible in the grainy image, was something that shouldn't have been there. Something that changed everything she thought she knew about this case. Sarah Chen's hands shook as she stared at the photograph on her laptop screen. The figure in the shadows was holding what appeared to be a camera, aimed directly at the crime scene. Someone had been documenting everything that night in 1982, and whoever they were, they had evidence that could prove Raymond Cole's story. She downloaded the image and backed it up to 3 different cloud servers. If someone was threatening her, she wasn't going to make it easy for them to erase what she'd found. The next morning, Sarah landed in Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat hit her like a wall as she stepped off the plane. She had Morrison's last known address, a retirement community on the outskirts of Scottsdale. During the drive, her mind raced through possibilities. Why would a detective bury evidence? What connected him to that prosecutor? And who had sent her that photograph? She pulled into the Sun Valley Retirement Village just after noon. The place was quiet, almost eerily so. Palm trees lined the streets, and identical beige houses stretched in neat rows. Number 47 was at the end of a cul-de-sac. Sarah knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. Through the window, she could see the living room. Newspapers were stacked on the coffee table. A coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter. Someone lived here. He's not home. Sarah spun around. An elderly woman stood on the neighboring driveway, watering her plants. "I'm looking for Frank Morrison," Sarah said, walking over. "Are you family?" the woman asked, eyeing her suspiciously. "I'm a journalist. I'm researching a case he worked on years ago in California." The woman's expression shifted. Something flickered in her eyes, fear maybe, or recognition. "Frank doesn't talk about his police work," she said carefully. "Especially not the California cases." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Do you know when he'll be back?" The woman turned off her hose. She glanced around as if checking whether anyone else was listening. "Frank hasn't been home in 3 weeks," she said quietly. "His car is still in the garage. His mail is piling up. I called the police, but they said there's no sign of foul play. They think he just took off somewhere. Before you move forward, I need to know something. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think Morrison disappeared on his own, or did someone make him vanish? Because what Sarah discovers next is going to blow your mind. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're hooked." Sarah felt ice forming in her chest. 3 weeks ago? When exactly? The neighbor thought for a moment. It was right after Thanksgiving. November 27th, I think. I remember because we invited him over for dinner and he never showed up. November 27th. That was 2 days after Sarah had first requested Morrison's case files from the Oakland Police Department. 2 days after she had put his name into official records. This wasn't a coincidence. "Did you notice anything strange before he disappeared?" Sarah pressed. "Anyone visiting him?" Strange cars. The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. There was a black sedan. I saw it parked across the street 3 or 4 times that week. Tinted windows. Never saw who was inside. Frank saw it too. I could tell it bothered him. Sarah thanked the woman and walked back to her rental car. Her mind was spinning. Morrison disappears right after she starts investigating. Someone threatens her to stop looking. The photograph showing a prosecutor at the scene. This wasn't just about one wrongful conviction anymore. This was a cover-up that had lasted decades, and people were willing to do anything to keep it buried. Back in California, Raymond Cole sat in his cell counting the days. March 15th was 73 days away. 73 days until they strapped him to a gurney and pumped poison into his veins for a crime he only partially committed. He had pulled the trigger on one victim, that much was true. But the other 2? That was his partner. The man the police had let walk away. The man whose name Cole had never spoken, not to his lawyer, not to anyone, because he knew what would happen if he did. Attorney David Brennan was in his office when his secretary buzzed him. "Mr. Brennan, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about the Cole case. She says it's urgent." Brennan sighed. Reporters had been hounding him for weeks since the execution date was announced. "Tell her I'm not doing interviews." "Sir, she says she has evidence. She says Detective Morrison is missing and she thinks it's connected to Raymond's case." Brennan sat up straight. "Send her in." Sarah Chen walked into the office carrying a laptop bag and a manila envelope. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dark circles ringed her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. But her gaze was sharp, focused, determined. "Mr. Brennan, my name is Sarah Chen. I'm an investigative journalist, and I think your client is telling the truth. I think there was a second person at that crime scene, and I think the police knew about it. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you need to see how this ends." Brennan gestured for her to sit. "Miss Chen, I've been Raymond's attorney for 12 years. I've heard every theory, seen every piece of evidence. What makes you think you found something new?" Sarah opened her laptop and turned it toward him. The photograph filled the screen. Morrison and the prosecutor, heads together, and in the background, the mysterious figure with the camera. "This photo was taken the night of the murders," Sarah explained. "Someone was documenting the crime scene independently. Someone who isn't mentioned in any of the official reports." Brennan leaned forward, studying the image. His expression changed from skepticism to shock. "Where did you get this?" "It was sent to me anonymously after I started investigating. But that's not all." Sarah pulled documents from the manila envelope. Detective Morrison wrote a note about a witness named Thomas Wheeler who saw 2 men leaving the scene. That investigation was never followed up. Wheeler died a year later. And Morrison? He disappeared 3 weeks ago, right after I requested his case files. Brennan's face had gone pale. "You're saying Morrison was part of a cover-up?" "I'm saying someone wanted Raymond Cole convicted, and they were willing to bury evidence to make it happen. The question is why?" Brennan stood and walked to his window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline. "Raymond has always maintained there was another person. He said the man was connected, protected. He said if he ever named him, he'd be dead within a week." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "Did he say who it was?" "No. And I stopped pushing him about it years ago because every time I brought it up, he'd shut down completely." The fear in his eyes was real. Sarah pulled out another document. "I found something else. The prosecutor on Cole's case was named Richard Harlow. He's now a federal judge. In this photograph, he's at the crime scene before he should have been. Prosecutors don't typically show up to active crime scenes. They wait for the investigation report." Brennan took the photo again, examining it more closely. Harlow built his entire career on high-profile convictions. The Cole case was one of his first major wins. It launched him into the spotlight. And if it came out that he knowingly prosecuted the wrong man, or only half the story? Sarah asked. His career would be destroyed. Federal judges have been impeached for less. The pieces were falling into place, But they still didn't have the full picture. "We need to find out who was taking these photographs," Brennan said. "If they documented the crime scene, they might have documented the second suspect too." Sarah nodded. "I'm working on it. But we're running out of time. Cole has 73 days. That evening, Raymond Cole received an unexpected visitor. It wasn't his lawyer or a family member. It was a man in an expensive suit, someone Cole had never seen before. The man sat down across from him and smiled, but it was a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Cole, my name is irrelevant. What matters is that I represent people who have a vested interest in seeing your execution carried out on schedule." Cole's jaw clenched. "I have nothing to say to you." The man leaned forward. "Oh, I think you do. You see, there's a journalist asking questions. A lawyer getting ambitious. People looking into things that should stay buried. I'm here to offer you a deal." "I'm not interested in deals. I've been here 15 years waiting for the truth to come out." The man's smile widened. "The truth? The truth is a luxury you can't afford. But here's what I can offer. If you keep your mouth shut, if you take what's coming to you quietly, your daughter will be taken care of. Full scholarship to any college she wants. A trust fund. A life free from the shadow of her father's crimes." Cole's hands balled into fists. They had just threatened the only thing in the world he cared about. "And if I refuse? Then accidents happen. People get hurt. Journalists have car crashes. Lawyers suffer from sudden heart attacks. Daughters walking home from school sometimes never make it." The man stood, straightening his tie. "You have 48 hours to decide. Call off your lawyer's investigation, tell the journalist to drop the story, and your little girl lives a beautiful life. Or be a hero and watch everyone you've ever cared about disappear." After the man left, Cole sat in his cell, trembling with rage and fear. For 15 years, he had stayed silent to protect himself. Now silence was the only way to protect his daughter. But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that staying quiet hadn't protected anyone. It had only allowed the real killer to walk free, to live a normal life while Cole rotted in a cell waiting to die for crimes he didn't fully commit. Back in her hotel room, Sarah received another email. This time, the message was longer. "If you want the full story, go to Oakland City Storage, Unit 247. The code is 1982. Everything you need is there. But be careful. They're watching you now. They know you're getting close." Sarah stared at the message. It could be a trap. It could be someone luring her into danger. But it could also be the break they desperately needed. She called Brennan. "I just got a tip about a storage unit in Oakland. Someone says there's evidence there." "Don't go alone," Brennan warned. "If this is real, if there's really a cover-up this deep, you're in danger." "I'm going tomorrow morning," Sarah said. "With or without backup, I'm going." The next day, Sarah stood in front of Unit 247 at Oakland City Storage. The facility was old, run down, located in an industrial area where few people ventured. She punched in the code, 1-9-8-2. The lock clicked. She lifted the rolling door, and it screeched open, revealing darkness inside. She pulled out her flashlight and stepped in. The unit was filled with boxes, filing cabinets, and old equipment. Dust covered everything. Sarah began opening boxes, finding files, photographs, and evidence logs. Then she found it. A box labeled Oakland 1982 Personal Archive. Inside were dozens of photographs, all taken the night of the murders. Clear, detailed images showing the crime scene from every angle. And there, in multiple shots, was a second man. Not Raymond Cole. Someone else. Someone whose face was clearly visible. I'm going to stop right there for a second. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, if you need to know who that second man is, you better subscribe right now. Because Chapter 3 is going to reveal everything, and trust me, you don't want to miss the ending of this insane case. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me who you think the second killer is. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the photograph up to the light. The man's features were distinct. She snapped photos with her phone, her heart racing. But as she reached for another box, she heard something. Footsteps. Outside the unit. She froze. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right outside. A shadow fell across the entrance. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She was trapped. And whoever was out there knew exactly where she was. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribcage as the shadow moved closer to the storage unit entrance. She gripped her phone tightly, the photographs of the second suspect still glowing on the screen. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "Miss Chin, I know you're in there. We need to talk." It was an older man's voice, rough and weathered. Sarah's mind raced through her options. The unit had no back exit. She was cornered. "Who are you?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Someone who's been waiting 20 years to tell the truth," the voice replied. "My name is Thomas Wheeler Jr. I think you've been looking for information about my father." Sarah's breath caught. Thomas Wheeler, the witness who claimed to see two men at the crime scene. The witness who died in 1983. "Your father is dead," Sarah said cautiously, still not moving from her position behind the boxes. "I know. And it wasn't exposure that killed him. It was 2 bullets to the back of his head, made to look like a robbery gone wrong. I was 17 when they murdered him. I've spent every day since then collecting evidence, waiting for someone brave enough to expose the truth." Slowly, Sarah moved toward the entrance, her phone recording everything. She needed proof of this conversation. The man standing outside was in his 50s, tall and lean with graying hair. His eyes were tired but fierce, carrying the weight of decades of anger and grief. "Why now?" Sarah asked. "Why contact me?" Thomas Jr. stepped into the unit, and Sarah saw he was carrying his own box of files. "Because Raymond Cole has 72 days to live, and I'm tired of letting my father's death mean nothing. I'm tired of watching a guilty man walk free while an innocent man pays for his crimes. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for me. Pause the video right now and hit that subscribe button. What you're about to hear is going to change everything you thought you knew about this case. Make sure you're subscribed because stories like this don't come around often, and you don't want to miss what happens next." Thomas Jr. opened his box and pulled out a folder. Inside were police reports, photographs, and handwritten notes. "My father was a Vietnam veteran. He had PTSD, lived on the streets, but he wasn't crazy. The night of the murders, he was sleeping in an alley near the crime scene. He saw everything. 2 men went into that building. Only one came out covered in blood. That was Raymond Cole. The other man left through the back entrance 10 minutes later, clean, calm, like nothing had happened." Sarah's mind reeled. "Your father told the police this?" "He told Detective Morrison. Morrison wrote it down just like you found. But the next day, someone else showed up. A prosecutor named Richard Harlow. He told my father that his testimony would complicate things, that Cole had already confessed, and that if my father cooperated and stayed quiet, he'd get help. Rehab, housing, support services. My father believed him. But Harlow never followed through," Sarah said, the pieces clicking together. Thomas Jr.'s expression darkened. "Worse than that. 3 weeks later, my father tried to recant his silence. He went to the police station and demanded to speak to Morrison. He said he couldn't live with himself knowing half the truth was being told. That night he was killed. The police called it a robbery. Case closed. No investigation. Morrison retired 6 months later with a full pension." Sarah felt sick. And the second suspect? Who was he? Thomas Jr. pulled out a photograph, one of the clear shots from the storage unit. "His name is Marcus Harlow, Richard Harlow's younger brother. In 1982, he was a low-level drug dealer with connections to organized crime. The 3 victims? They weren't random. They were witnesses set to testify against Marcus's boss in a federal case. Marcus was hired to eliminate them. He brought Raymond Cole as backup, someone expendable, someone who could take the fall if things went wrong." Sarah stared at the photograph. Marcus Harlow's face was clear in the image. Why would Richard Harlow protect his brother? Because Marcus had evidence of Richard's own corruption. Bribes, evidence tampering, connections to criminal organizations. If Marcus went down, he'd take Richard with him. So Richard made a deal. He'd pin everything on Cole, who had already confessed to being there, and Marcus would disappear. Marcus changed his identity, moved to Europe, and Richard's career skyrocketed. Sarah's hands shook as she absorbed the magnitude of the conspiracy. We need to take this to the authorities. We need to stop Cole's execution. Thomas Jr. shook his head grimly. It's not that simple. Richard Harlow is a federal judge now. He has powerful friends in law enforcement, politics, and the legal system. The moment we go public, they'll bury us. We need irrefutable proof, and we need it to go viral so they can't suppress it. That's when Sarah understood. That's why you contacted me. You need the story out there, in the public eye, where they can't make it disappear. Exactly. And we have 72 days to make it happen. They spent the next 6 hours in that storage unit, going through every piece of evidence Thomas Jr. had collected. Photographs, witness statements, financial records showing payments from Richard Harlow to various individuals, flight records showing Marcus Harlow leaving the country in 1983. It was overwhelming, damning, and absolutely terrifying. Meanwhile, inside San Quentin, Raymond Cole was facing his own crisis. The man in the expensive suit had returned, this time with photographs. Pictures of Cole's daughter, Emma, now 23 years old, leaving her apartment, walking to her job, sitting in a coffee shop. Time's up, Mr. Cole, the man said coldly. Have you made your decision? Cole stared at the photographs, his heart breaking. His daughter was his entire world. He had stayed silent for 15 years to protect himself, but now his silence could save her life. Or his truth could free him but destroy her. I need to speak to my lawyer, Cole said finally. The man smiled. Wrong answer. He stood and walked toward the door, then paused. You have 24 hours. After that, we stop playing nice. After he left, Cole sat alone in his cell, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in 15 years, he realized that silence wasn't protection. It was a prison worse than the one he was already in. David Brennan received Sarah's call at midnight. We have everything, she said breathlessly. Photos, witness testimony, financial records. We can prove Cole was set up. We can prove Marcus Harlow was the primary killer and that Richard Harlow covered it up. Brennan felt hope surge through him for the first time in years. We need to file an emergency motion for a stay of execution. We need to present this evidence to the court immediately. There's a problem, Sarah said. Thomas Wheeler Jr. says if we go through official channels, Harlow will bury it. He has too many connections. We need to go public first, create so much noise that they can't ignore it. Brennan understood the risk. If we do that, we could compromise the legal case. Evidence released to the public might be deemed inadmissible. And if we don't, Cole dies in 72 days and the truth dies with him, Sarah countered. If you're still watching this, I need you to drop a comment right now. Tell me, should they risk going public or trust the legal system? Because what they decide next determines whether justice is served or buried forever. And don't forget to smash that like button if this story has you hooked. Brennan made the decision. We do both. We file the emergency motion and we release the story simultaneously. We hit them from every angle so they can't suppress it. Sarah agreed. They spent the next 48 hours preparing. Sarah wrote her documentary script, incorporating every piece of evidence. Brennan prepared his legal motion with supporting documents. Thomas Wheeler Jr. recorded a video testimony explaining everything his father witnessed and everything he had uncovered over the past 2 decades. On January 10, 2026, everything went live. Sarah's documentary dropped on YouTube at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Within 2 hours, it had 100,000 views. By noon, it had hit 1 million. News outlets picked it up. Social media exploded. #JusticeForCole began trending worldwide. The photographs of Marcus Harlow at the crime scene went viral. Reporters descended on Richard Harlow's office. The legal motion was filed simultaneously, demanding an emergency stay of execution and a full investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. The response was swift and brutal. Richard Harlow issued a statement denying everything, calling it a conspiracy theory designed to free a convicted murderer. His lawyers filed motions to suppress the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. Federal marshals raided the storage unit, seizing everything. But it was too late. The evidence was already out there, backed up on servers across the world, shared millions of times. Inside San Quentin, Raymond Cole sat in his cell watching the news on the small television. Tears streamed down his face as he saw Sarah Chen on the screen, showing his photograph alongside Marcus Harlow's, explaining the conspiracy. For the first time in 15 years, someone believed him. Someone was fighting for him. Then his cell door opened. It was the man in the expensive suit, but this time he wasn't smiling. His face was red with fury. "You did this," he hissed. "You told them." Cole stood, facing him directly. "I didn't tell them anything. The truth found its own way out. It always does." The man stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Your daughter is surrounded by federal protection," Cole interrupted. David Brennan made sure of that the moment the story went live. "You can't touch her. You can't touch any of us anymore." The man's composure cracked. For a moment, Cole saw real fear in his eyes. Then he turned and left without another word. Cole sat back down on his bunk, allowing himself to breathe for the first time in days. The weight that had crushed him for 15 years was finally lifting. Over the next week, the investigation exploded. The FBI opened a formal inquiry into Richard Harlow's conduct. Forensic accountants traced financial payments from Harlow to various individuals, including the retired Detective Morrison. Marcus Harlow was located in Geneva, Switzerland, living under an assumed name. Interpol issued an arrest warrant. Morrison was found in a small town in Montana, living under witness protection that Harlow had arranged. When confronted with the evidence, he broke down and confessed to everything. On January 20th, the California Supreme Court issued an emergency stay of Raymond Cole's execution. On February 3rd, all charges against Cole related to 2 of the 3 murders were dropped. He pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter for the one victim he had actually killed, receiving credit for time served. On February 15, 2026, after spending 15 years and 73 days on death row, Raymond Cole walked out of San Quentin State Prison a free man. Sarah Chen was there to document it. As Cole stepped through the prison gates, his daughter Emma ran to him, embracing him for the first time since she was 8 years old. The cameras captured everything. Cole looked directly at Sarah, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for believing the truth mattered more than the story they told." But the story wasn't over. Richard Harlow was indicted on multiple charges including obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. His judicial career ended in disgrace. Marcus Harlow was extradited from Switzerland and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. His trial was set for later that year. Detective Morrison accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, receiving a reduced sentence. Now, before I tell you the final twist, I need you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Because what happened next is something that will stay with you long after this video ends. This is the moment that proves why stories like this matter, why the truth can never stay buried forever. 6 months later, Sarah Chen received a package at her office. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. The note read, "Thank you for exposing the truth about my brother. But you only scratched the surface. Richard didn't just cover up one case. There are 11 others. 11 wrongful convictions. 11 people still waiting for justice. The files are on this drive. The question is, are you brave enough to keep digging?" Sarah inserted the drive into her computer. 11 folders appeared on the screen, each labeled with a name and a date. She opened the first one. Inside were crime scene photos, case files, and evidence logs. Her blood ran cold as she realized the scope of what she was looking at. This wasn't just one corrupt prosecutor. This was a systematic operation spanning 2 decades, involving multiple law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and judges. Lives destroyed to protect the powerful and the connected. She picked up her phone and called David Brennan. "We're not done," she said when he answered. "Not even close." Brennan was silent for a moment. "How deep does this go?" "Deeper than we ever imagined. And we're going to expose every single case." Raymond Cole, now living quietly with his daughter in Northern California, received a call that same evening. It was Sarah. "Raymond, I need to ask you something. During your time on death row, did you ever hear stories from other inmates? Cases that didn't seem right? Convictions that felt wrong?" Cole thought back to 15 years of conversations in the yard, whispered confessions in the dark, men proclaiming their innocence. "Yes," he said slowly. "There were several. Men I believed. Men whose stories never added up." "I need you to remember their names," Sarah said, "because we're going to give them what someone gave you. We're going to give them a chance at the truth." Cole felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow," Sarah replied. "We start tomorrow." The documentary Sarah created about Raymond Cole's case became the most watched true crime story of 2026, accumulating over 50 million views. It sparked a national conversation about wrongful convictions, prosecutorial misconduct, and the death penalty. Legal reform bills were introduced in 6 states. The Innocence Project saw a surge in funding and support, and 11 other inmates, 11 other families, 11 other lives touched by the same corruption, finally had hope. But here's the thing that haunts Sarah Chin to this day, the thing that keeps her awake at night. If she hadn't stumbled onto Morrison's note, if Thomas Wheeler Jr. hadn't spent 20 years collecting evidence, if Raymond Cole had been executed 72 days after his scheduled date, none of this would have come to light. The truth would have died with him. Marcus Harlow would still be living freely in Switzerland. Richard Harlow would still be a federal judge. And 11 other innocent people would still be rotting in prison, waiting for justice that would never come. That's the terrifying reality of our justice system. How many Raymond Coles are out there right now, sitting in cells, waiting for execution, waiting for someone to believe them? How many corrupt officials are still operating, still covering up, still destroying lives to protect themselves? We'll never know the full scope. But Sarah Chin isn't stopping. David Brennan isn't stopping. Raymond Cole isn't stopping. They're digging into every one of those 11 cases, and they won't rest until every truth is exposed. Drop a comment right now and tell me, do you think our justice system needs a complete overhaul? Do you believe there are more cases like this out there? And if you think this story matters, if you think these investigations need to continue, subscribe to this channel. Because the work isn't done. The fight for justice never ends. And the next story we uncover might be even bigger than this one. As for Raymond Cole, he lives each day as a gift. He helps his daughter through college. He volunteers with criminal justice reform organizations. And every night before he goes to sleep, he thinks about the 15 years he lost, the men still trapped in the system, and the thin line between truth and injustice. He survived death row. He survived the longest wait. But the scars remain, invisible but permanent, a reminder that justice delayed isn't just justice denied. Sometimes it's justice that almost never comes at all. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because there are more Raymond Coles out there right now, counting down the days, waiting for someone to care enough to look deeper, to question the narrative, to fight for the truth. Will you be that someone? Will you share this story? Will you demand better from our justice system? Or will we let the next Raymond Cole slip through the cracks, executed for crimes he didn't commit, while the Rayal killers walk free? The choice is ours. The power is ours. And the time to act is now. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us in the fight for truth and justice. Because if this story taught us anything, it's that silence protects the guilty and destroys the innocent. And we're done being silent.